I'd like to thank you for joining today's webinar, which will focus around workflow. My name is Matt Grierville. I'm a sales engineer here with SalesPad. Just a couple quick notes before we jump into this. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to enter those into the question box and we'll do our best to answer those at the conclusion of the demo. Anything that we can't answer off the top of our head, we'll make sure that we do prepare responses and email those to you, but please feel free to use that question box throughout. So just kind of starting with the first slide here, this kind of goes over the agenda that we'll cover. We're going to talk initially just about workflow concepts. What does that word mean? What are we doing with that inside SalesPad? Then we're going to talk about the sales monitor, which is kind of the front end piece that will give you the visibility of your workflow and the vision of all the documents as they move through the different stages of the fulfillment process that you define. We'll also talk about plugins, smart printing, and workflow rules, which will take your workflow that you've defined for each document and really enhance it and automate some of the functions that you may need to occur on the back end. And then we'll finish up with a discussion on the opportunity monitor, which is essentially some of the same workflow principles and the advantages that we allow for sales documents, quotes, and invoices within SalesPad, but extended over to the prospect level. So if you have a pre-sales process, what does that look like, and how can we support that with some of the workflow that we have for that process as well? And then, as I mentioned, we'll go ahead and go into a live demo after that. So just starting with workflow concepts, I wanted to bring up a process map that just kind of strips away a lot of the details, a lot of the nitty-gritty, and just kind of shows you in its rawest form what workflow is. And what workflow is essentially all of the different stages and processes that need to occur for a sales order from the time it's entered to the time it leaves your facility. So we're going to allow you to define that process from within SalesPad and then gain the visibility of those sales documents as they move through that process, but also take that a step further and allow you to account for additional scenarios and additional touch points that document may need to go through. So we're going to allow you to build that framework so that you can automate a lot of the processes that you're doing now to fulfill sales orders. As I mentioned, SalesPad workflow is the sequence of processes an order must pass through from the initial time it's entered to the time you fulfilled it and invoiced it. The sequences and queues that we discuss within SalesPad, these are the equivalent to batches in Dynamics GP. We allow different order types to have their own unique workflows. So if you have a customer that's a priority customer, for example, and you want to just have a very efficient pass-through high priority workflow queue that just pushes those orders through and gives them priority, we can do that as well. Another big point we want to talk about is the flexibility with workflow. So what I show you today, this is just strictly what I have set up in my demo, but we do give you the flexibility, as you'll see, to really define the workflow specific to your business process so we can adapt to the way you want this to function. Sales Monitor, this is something that we'll show in great detail because this is kind of the front end where you're going to be able to see the orders in each step they're in. It's going to give you the total document counts, the dollar value that's sitting in each batch, and it really does a lot to raise accountability in the organization because at any given time you know precisely who's responsible for taking the next action to fulfill a sales order. So we'll talk a lot about that. So another thing we're going to talk about is plugins, smart printing, and workflow rules, as I mentioned. And these three components to the workflow really allow you to streamline, enhance, and automate things that may need to occur outside of the workflow to fulfill an order. So workflow, for example, we can trigger built-in functionalities with queue-to-queue movements. With smart printing, we can automate emails or specific reports. Maybe you want a confirmation to go out to a customer, or maybe you want someone internally to be notified when an order moves to a specific queue. That's something that we can automate with smart printing. And then workflow rules are a very powerful tool that will allow you to create logic to flag orders and move them to specific queues throughout the process as certain conditions exist. So what we're essentially allowing you to do with these three components is build in a really robust framework on the back end so it eliminates a lot of the manual effort that's required as you take action to fulfill orders. And as I mentioned, the opportunity monitor, we do extend this functionality over to the opportunity management, prospect management. So if you have a pre-sales process before you bring a customer in and you want to map out the different steps that are involved in that management process, we can assist with that as well. Okay, so to start the demo, I think what we'll do is begin with a customer card, and I'll create a sales document, a sales order, and I'm going to push that through the workflow to kind of show you some of the things that we can do to manage certain situations, like what do you do if you have an item that you can sell, but the second line item you're actually out of stock on, so you want to back order it. So how would we manage that and use workflow, leverage workflow to manage that type of situation? So we'll start there, and then I'll go into the sales monitor to show you kind of the high level view of those orders working through the workflow. And then from there we'll transition into the workflow setup to kind of do a little bit more deeper dive on the setup that needs to happen behind that functionality. So I have my customer card open here, the Aaron Fitz Electrical, and I'm going to be working with this SP order type. So when I open up a new order, as I mentioned, I'm going to bring an item in that I have stock of, and then I'm going to bring in another item that I'm actually out of stock on and show you how workflow can help manage that back order situation. So you can see this first item, HD40, I do have available stock of, so that's fine. I can push that through and fulfill it. But what happens when you have a second item that you don't have stock of? How do you manage that? How do you leverage workflow to automate and streamline that process? So with this item, you can see that the HD20 is out of stock. It highlighted the line item orange, so I want to back order that. And with that item back ordered, once I release this through my workflow, I have this workflow set up to assess the back order and then split the document automatically based on the back order, where I can take the quantity that I do have available and immediately fulfill that, but also maintain visibility of the back ordered items so that if my purchasing staff needs to take action on that and issue a PO to the vendor and get that product brought into our facility, they have the visibility to do just that. So once I brought these two items on, I have the one quantity back order that I'm currently out of stock on. I'm going to go ahead and hit the release button. And this release button is going to move this order from the initial new order queue that I have defined into the workflow in general. And anything that I do have stock of, it's going to move it to the picking queue. Anything that I'm out of stock of, it will move to a back order queue that I've defined. So when I release this, it will bring up my splitting document screen, which recognized the back order, so it's asking me if I want to split the quantity that I do have available to a .1 version of this sales order, and the quantity I have on back order, move that to a .2 version of this sales order. So I'm going to say OK. And you can see that the document, one of them moved to the picking queue that I do have available, the other one moved to the back ordered queue. So once I hit OK, I can pick up the visualization of that through a tool we call Sales Monitor. So Sales Monitor is where you have total visibility of your entire workflow and all of the orders that are currently in that workflow and what stage they're in. So as I mentioned, I'm using the SP order type, and this is the workflow for that particular order. So you can see I have a new order queue with 54 orders in it. I have 3 in my margin review, 19 in back order, 9 in picking, 23 orders in packing, and 2 in shipping. And then I can also see the dollar values associated with each one of those stages. So as I mentioned earlier, workflow really allows you to raise accountability company-wide, because at any given moment, you know precisely who's responsible for taking the next action required to fulfill a sales order. So going back to that order that I just created, I had the .1 version go to my picking queue and the .2 go to my back ordered queue. I'm just going to scroll down and open up that document to show you how that happens. So 10096.1, that was the order that I created that split to the picking queue for the component I did have available. And if I open up this order, you can see that the HD40, that was the item I did have available, and that went ahead and moved that automatically to the picking queue. Now the .2 version of that order moved to my back ordered queue automatically because I didn't have stock of that particular item. So you can see that 10096.2, that is in my back order queue, where, as I mentioned, my purchasing staff or whoever's responsible for cutting POs to my to your vendors to procure those items can go ahead and take action on that and bring that stock in. So that's one scenario, but this is just to kind of show how we can handle different business functions that may be required on the back end as you take action on fulfilling sales documents. So from Sales Monitor, to build this out, we build the content for Sales Monitor through the workflow setup screen. So with workflow setup, this is where you're going to define your different queue names. So you can pick what you want to call each one of the queues, how many are there. You can also label the buttons. So as I showed you, I had a release button in the upper right-hand corner of the sales document. So you actually have control over what you label those buttons right here with the button caption. You also have the ability to assign plugins. So in my case, I had a sales document split plugin, which keyed off of the back order and split the back ordered quantity to the back ordered queue and the quantity I did have available to the picking queue. So that's the plugin that made that possible. We have a full library of plugins, as you can see. So if you have maybe a purchase order that you want to generate automatically, or maybe you're in a manufacturing environment and you want the manufacturing order to automatically be generated on the back end for a finished good, we have a whole library of plugins that you can initiate additional action from these queue-to-queue moves in our workflow setup. We also have the ability to define the next queue or queues. So if you want to move this to one particular queue, maybe you have a very linear flow and it can only move to one queue incrementally, or maybe you have a more advanced workflow where you want it to move to potentially several different queues based on certain conditions that may exist on the sales document. You can define a queue or multiple queues in the next queue column here. Now we also have these columns, force, evaluate, and I'll talk a little bit more about that now. So as you can see on my new order queue, I have this evaluate checkbox marked. And what that's going to tell the workflow to do is essentially look at any workflow rules that may apply and the conditions that may apply for those rules, and then route the actual sales document accordingly. So you can see on this evaluate checkbox, I do have a couple of workflow rules that I'm applying here in this demonstration I'm showing. So the first one was the back order. So if I have a back ordered item, it's going to move that back order to, you can see here, the back ordered workflow queue. So this was the rule I had running in the background when I did that document split that told that back ordered quantity to move to that particular queue. Another thing I have is a margin review. So if you have an item that may exceed a certain dollar amount, you always want those margins to be reviewed to make sure they're accurate. You can set rules to do things like that. So I have an additional rule set to be evaluated on this new order queue for margin. So I'll show you what that looks like. So if I create a new order and I bring in a particular item, and I'm going to use this part number 3705. The price is $175. So when I save that, my margin review is set to anything above $175 or $175 or higher to kick back to the margin review. So since this price meets that criteria, when I release this, it's going to say margin approval was evaluated and the response was true because it exceeded that price target I noted, and it's actually going to move this back to the margin review queue. So if I go back into my Sales Monitor and refresh, if I go down to margin review, I'll be able to see that order. So 10097, the order I just entered, automatically moved to margin review queue because it exceeded that dollar value that I defined in my workflow rule. So and I'll just open this up to show you kind of the library of workflow rules that we have preset. So we have a pretty extensive library here. So really any condition that you want to account for that may exist on your sales document or the customer or the item level that you want to be evaluated, and then based on that evaluation, move that to a specific queue. You can do that from the workflow rule setup here. Now we also have another feature that kind of accompanies, so just to kind of recap before I move on, we've covered kind of the plugins, We've also covered the workflow rules, but if you recall, there was kind of a third tool, smart printing, that I want to kind of cover a little bit as well. So smart printing will allow you, based on a queue movement, to initiate maybe a printed form, maybe an email goes out, or maybe you want a manager to have a text message sent to them. So this is where you would set that up and have that accompany the workflow. So you can see here that we're going to define initially which document type we want this rule to apply to. Then we're going to select the specific document ID, and then also the warehouse that we want this rule to apply in. From there, we would pick the queue that we want this particular smart print operation to occur at, the salesperson ID, the system user that it would apply to, and then the specific report. So if we want maybe an order confirmation, maybe a quote, maybe a pick ticket to print, a packing slip, any number of reports, or maybe an email to be issued, we can define that here. If we want a specific printer to run the print job, or maybe there is no printer because it's an email, we can define that here as well. And then we can check off the different email addresses, whether we want that tied to the shipping email, the billing email, or a static email, or maybe it's a phone number. Maybe we want a text message to go out. We can define all of that in the smart printing maintenance. So I have a smart printing maintenance set up on my workflow that when I move an order from picking to packing, it automatically generates a packing slip. So if I go into my picking queue, and let's just say, for example, this particular order I'm opening up, this was picked, I want to mark this complete and move that over to the packing queue, you can see that I have this automatically prompting me for this print job. And since I can't really show a printer here, I had it defaulted to go to my XPS document creator. So, but that's kind of the, again, going back to the automation that we can do with workflow with some of these additional tools like plugins, workflow rules, and smart printing. We can really automate a lot of the activity that may surround the fulfillment process with these additional tools. With that, I'll transition over to the opportunity side. So we also have a little bit of the workflow that carries over to opportunity and prospect management. So opportunity and prospects are kind of like the pre-sales objects. You don't have, they haven't purchased from you yet. Maybe you don't have a quote itemized yet, but you don't want to lose track of them. You want to keep them on your radar. We do support prospects and opportunities within SalesPad, and then we also provide you with a tool called Opportunity Monitor. And I wanted to show this because the principle behind the Opportunity Monitor is somewhat similar to Sales Monitor. You know, we don't have as many workflow rules or the plugins and the smart printing that kind of flows with Opportunity Monitor, but it does allow you to define different stages for your pre-sales process and then maintain visibility of those opportunities as they move through all of those pre-sales processes. So you can see here I have a very basic workflow for my opportunities. I have discovery, negotiation, quoting, closed won, closed lost, and then I can see the count of the opportunities that exist in each one of those stages. And then similar to Sales Monitor, where you have the detailed view over here on the right, where I can actually drill into those opportunities. So I can see I have 4 in the quoting stage. These are the opportunities that are currently in that quoting stage, and I can drill into those. And if I want to update the status of those and move them to a different stage, closed won or closed loss, I can go ahead and do that from the opportunity card there. And then when I go back to my Opportunity Monitor and refresh that, you can see quoting went down to 3. The closed loss went up. So you can kind of go back and forth with the different stages and kind of maintain visibility of the progress on your prospect and opportunity management as well. So far I've showed you the workflow relative to a sales order, but this could extend to other document types as well. This could extend to quotes, invoices, returns. So if I go into quotes, for example, you know, I have a very basic layout here as well, but maybe you want to have a 30-day close, 60-day close, 90-day close, closed won, closed loss queue, where you can track the different stages of your quotes, and you have a better, this will kind of give you a better idea of when they expect to you know, convert to orders and come into the system. So you can build out kind of a pre-sales quote queue as well. This also applies to returns, so if you have returns that you initiate with customers and you want kind of a return workflow when those orders come back, we can also support that as well. So here you can see I've got my return type document and I have a queue awaiting return. So in this queue, we're waiting for those orders to come back from the customers, those items that were sold. I also have an inspection queue, so once they come back in, if you want those return documents to move to an inspection queue, we can do that. I have another queue for credit decision and then ready to post. So if you have a return workflow for any of the items that may be coming back from your customers, this could be helpful as well. So with the prospect and the opportunity monitor, that kind of concludes today's webinar. Again, I'm going to be jumping on the question box in just a second. So if you have any questions that may have popped up as we wrapped up this session, please feel free to keep entering those. I'll go through immediately after the webinar and answer as many as I can. If I don't get to you, don't worry. We'll take your information down. We'll make sure we get a response out to you. And with that, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate your time.